Take a breath with me for a second. Have you ever had a moment, maybe in the shower, maybe in the quiet of your own car, where you looked at your own life and you thought, why do I keep doing this? Not in a curious way, in a frustrated, almost defeated way. Because you know what you should do? You know the relationship isn't healthy. You know the habit is hurting you. You know you should slow down. You should ask for help. You should speak up. You need to let go. And yet here you are. Again, same pattern, same outcome, different day. And here's what makes this even harder. Most people just assume that if they tried harder, or they thought about it more, or even wanted it badly enough, that they could finally actually change. But that's not how the brain actually works. And until we understand why the brain holds on to the patterns that it does, even the incredibly painful ones, we'll keep fighting ourselves. We'll keep stepping on that gas and the brake at the same time, wondering why we're not moving anywhere. So today, I want to pull back the curtain on what's actually happening underneath these stuck patterns. We're going to talk about how the subconscious mind works, how modern hypnotherapy accesses it, and what the science of neuroplasticity tells us about why change is not only possible, it's predictable. When you know how to work with your brain instead of against it. Welcome to the Sit Around the Fire podcast. I'm Ashlea Dillard, a licensed professional counselor, a certified clinical hypnotherapist, and someone who has spent nearly a decade running toward emergencies as a firefighter and a paramedic before I started running towards my own healing. I want to start with something that might actually bring you an incredible amount of relief. Your subconscious mind is not actually trying to ruin your life. It's trying to protect you. The problem is, it's often protecting you with outdated programming. Here's what I mean by this. Your brain, above almost everything else, is an efficiency machine. It takes repeated experiences, repeated emotions, repeated beliefs, repeated behaviors, and it converts them into automatic responses. Why does it do this? Because automation saves energy. Your brain uses roughly 20% of your body's total energy, even though it only makes up about 2% of your actual body weight. So anything that it can offload to autopilot, it is going to do that. That's why you don't consciously walk through every single step when you brush your teeth in the morning, or you drive a familiar route, or you bike after not touching one for 15 years. Your subconscious takes over. And on a practical level, that's actually incredibly useful. But here's where this gets complicated. The same process that automates brushing your teeth also automates your emotional responses. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between physical skill and emotional conditioning. It just learns. So, if you grew up in a home where love was inconsistent, where affection was earned rather than freely given, your nervous system may have learned, I have to perform to be worthy. And decades later, you find yourself chronically overachieving, never feeling like enough, or even shutting down the moment someone gets close. Not because you're broken, because your brain adapted. If you grew up in an environment of chaos or unpredictability, your nervous system may have learned that peace is suspicious. That calm means something bad is coming. So even when your life genuinely feels stable and is stable and safe, you might feel this low hum of underlying anxiety. a need to even create problems, a restlessness that doesn't make sense on paper. If you've learned to stay small, to not take up too much space, to not want too much, to not stand out, then success and visibility may actually trigger discomfort in you today. Your nervous system may be registering a threat, and even being seen equals threat. You'll find yourself sabotaging, pulling back, right when things start to go very well. None of this is a character flaw. It comes down to neurological conditioning. The brain learned what kept you safe and it held on to this. Now, the question is, how do we actually update this programming? Now, this is exactly where modern hypnotherapy becomes one of the really incredible tools here. Because hypnosis, real clinical hypnosis, is not mind control. It's not what you've seen in stage shows or even on movies or perhaps in Vegas. It's a focused awareness. It's a state of heightened receptivity that allows us to access our subconscious patterns directly, to work underneath that analytical resistance that I already knew this part of your mind, and it distinctly matters enormously because most people are trying to change behavior consciously, while the subconscious programming underneath is very much running the show. Let me tell you a little bit about the people who shaped the work that I do with hypnosis. Gil Boyne, one of the foundational figures in modern hypnotherapy as we know it, is Gil. Boyne was a hypnotherapist who practiced and taught for over 5 decades. He trained thousands of practitioners and is considered one of the architects of this modern clinical hypnotherapy as a very legitimate therapeutic discipline. Now, what made Boyne's approach so significant and different was his emphasis on the affect bridge work. This is the idea that current symptoms and behaviors aren't random. They're emotionally connected to earlier experiences stored in our subconscious mind. He didn't believe we were fundamentally broken or disordered in some way. He believed that all of us really carry these unresolved patterns. And rather than endlessly just trying to analyze those patterns from the outside, using solely willpower and even intellectual understanding, Boyne worked to help clients access the actual emotional root of the pattern, because that's where the real charge lives. You can totally understand your childhood from an intellectual level. You can know exactly where a fear came from and still feel it grip in the body the same way it always has. That's because understanding something cognitively doesn't automatically update the subconscious program. Gill's work was about going deeper to the place where the original emotional learning happened, so it could actually be processed and released rather than just solely talking about it. Another influential voice in this field is Matthew Brownstein, whose work bridges hypnotherapy with transpersonal psychology, which is the study of consciousness, spiritual experience, in the deeper dimensions of the human transformation. Now, Brownstein's perspective adds something incredibly important here, you guys. He talks about the subconscious not just as a repository of old wounds, but truly as a doorway to something larger, to the deeper self that exists behind and underneath all of that conditioning. One of the ideas that I find most resonant in his work with this is that healing isn't about becoming something new. It's about removing the layers of conditioning that disconnected you from who you already are. Think about that for a moment, because I think that this reframe really changes everything. Most people come into therapy or come to a podcast like this one with the belief that they need to fix something in themselves, that they are fundamentally flawed in some way, that they need to rebuild from scratch. But what if that's not true? What if the anxiety, the self-doubt, the stuck patterns, what if those aren't the real you? What if they're the layers, adaptations, armor, strategies that made sense once and that you no longer need? And that's where the clinical work of hypnotherapy can be so genuinely transformative. Because not mind control, not because a hypnotherapist plants something new inside of you, but because the process removes what's actually covering up things that are already there. So let's get practical for a moment. How does hypnosis actually help change a pattern? First, what is hypnosis? Clinically, hypnosis is a state of focused attention and heightened suggestibility. So it's a natural occurring state, one that most people enter into and exit multiple times throughout the day without even realizing it. That absorption you feel when you're deep in a book or even when you lose track of time. The way a long drive can seem to just disappear. The almost meditative state you feel just before you fall asleep. Those are all hypnotic adjacent states. What we do in clinical hypnotherapy is intentionally induce and work within that state. And here's why this matters. In your normal waking state, your conscious mind is very active. It's analyzing, evaluating, defending, doubting. When someone tells you just believe in yourself, your conscious mind might immediately respond with a list of reasons why you shouldn't. That critical factor that shows up, and it's the biggest obstacle to change. Hypnosis works in part by quieting that analytical gatekeeper, not by bypassing your will or your values, but creating a state where the subconscious becomes more accessible. And in that state, through imagery, emotional processing, focus suggestion, repetition, the brain begins creating new associations, new emotional responses to old triggers, new neural pathways. And this is where the neuroscience gets really exciting, because for a long time, the prevailing belief was that the adult brain was essentially fixed. That after a certain point in development, the structure of the brain was set. That's it, it's over. But we know now that is not even true, not even a little bit. The brain has what's called neuroplasticity, the capacity to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Every time you have a thought, you fire a memory or an experience, an emotion, neurons are firing. And neurons that fire together wire together. That's an old principle that still holds up in modern neuroscience today, which means the thoughts you repeatedly think strengthen those pathways. The emotions you repeatedly reinforce deepen those grooves. The stories you repeatedly tell yourself become the architecture of your own reality. But here's the part that matters the most. New pathways can also be created, and specific conditions accelerate that process. Repetition. The brain learns through consistent, repeated exposure. Emotion. Emotionally charged experience creates stronger, faster neural encoding. This is why a traumatic event can rewire the brain after a single occurrence, and why emotionally resonant healing experiences can also create rapid change. Focused attention. What you attend to grows, and the brain prioritizes and strengthens the networks that you consistently activate. Vivid imagery. Research on motor imagery and mental rehearsal shows us that the brain activates similar neural patterns, whether you're actually performing an action or just vividly imagining it. Athletes have been known to do this for decades. That's why hypnotherapy works on the very same principle. Now, hypnosis combines all four of these things. It's a state of focused attention. It uses emotionally resonant imagery. It works through repetition, and it engages the subconscious where old patterns are stored and where new ones can take root most effectively. Now, I want to pause here because there's something I see derail people's healing over and over again. And it has to do with the stories that we tell ourselves. The problem for most people is not the lack of desire to change. It's that they keep rehearsing the identity that they're actually trying to escape. I'm anxious. I'm broken. I'm always self-sabotaging. I can't trust people. This is just who I am. Said enough times with enough feeling behind them, those statements become neurologically encoded. They stop being just descriptions of an experience, and they become the lens through which you actually filter everything. Your brain begins to confirm them. And that's not weakness. That's just how the brain works. It's consistently pattern matching, constantly looking for evidence to support the stories it already believes. The clinical term for this is confirmation bias, operating at the level of neural architecture. But the more important point is this: if repetition helped create this pattern, repetition can also help change it. This is why the language we use about ourselves matter so much clinically. It's why I spend a significant amount of time with clients, not just on what happened to them, but on what they've decided it means about them. And why hypnotherapy, we are very intentional. And why in hypnotherapy, we are very intentional about the suggestions we introduce, the images that we build on, and the emotional experience that we create in that subconscious space. Because we're literally laying down new track. I want to give you something to sit with before we actually close out today. Think about one story you've been carrying about yourself. Not an event, not something that happened, a story about who you are. Maybe it's, I'm not the kind of person who, or people like me don't, or simply, I'm just, followed by something limiting. Now ask yourself, when did you first decide that that was true? What was happening in your life when that belief got installed? And most importantly, was it a truth? Or was it a strategy? Something that you learned in a specific context to stay safe or loved or accepted. Because if it was a strategy, and most of these honestly are, then it was never permanent. It was always something that could be updated. Now, in the next episode, we're going to move from understanding why the patterns exist to the practical side of how change actually happens. We'll talk about what it looks like to begin to interrupt these patterns in real time, how to use what you now understand about neuroplasticity and the subconscious to start working with your brain instead of fighting it, and how the combination of hypnosis, embodiment, and repetition creates the kind of change that actually sticks. Because awareness is powerful. And I believe you're here because some part of you is ready to move. Not just understand, but actually move. If this episode landed for you, share it with someone who's been stuck feeling stuck and can't figure out why. That's exactly who this series is for. And make sure you're following the show so you don't miss out on part 3 coming up. You can find me at all the resources, sitaroundthefire.org and ashleadillard.com. Thank you for your support. Thank you for listening with me today. And I will see you around the fire again very soon.